Hi, in this video, I'm going to give you an example of writing a for loop in R. For loop is another type of control structure. Provide a few examples. So let's get started. So again, the topic for this video is specifically the for loop. Check out some of the other videos on how to write an if-else statement or a while loop or other control structures. Those topics, so the other control structures are covered in more detail in the other videos. Okay, so a for loop is very common. It's probably very widely used. It's very easy to write and very useful. For loop is used to repeat a specific block of code by iterating over an integer, often in a list or vector. So this is how a for loop looks like. This is a structure of a for loop in R. So here's an example for I in 1:10. So I is what you typically refer to as an index. So I will start at a value of 1, and it's an integer value that increment by 1. So it'll go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to the value 10. Okay. So then the block of code that'll repeat is inside the curly brackets. So in our case, it's just print I. Okay. And again, the value of I, it iterates from 1 to 10. Right. So the output should be, when I run this code, will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's in the concept of appear vertically, but so what's happening in R is the for loop will execute. So this loop will go through and execute this print command 10 times because our index goes from 1 through 10. Okay, so let's go into RStudio and try this out. Okay, so here's our RStudio. So set up my let me just quickly get rid of my workspace here. Yeah, I had to clear out my workspace there, or my environment there. So let's try out this example. So I'm going to create a for loop for I in 1:10. Okay. Let me highlight just this portion here, see what happens. So this is a list from 1 through 10. Okay, so I'm just going to print I. Okay, if we run this, we should see 10, 1 through 10 here. So this is running 10 times, this for loop. The variable I, it iterates from, this is typically referred to as the index. It's indexing from 1 through 10. Okay. Let's try something else. Rather than do this, let's just put, I don't know, print, let's print 24. Okay. So what happens? So the value 24 should just be printed out 10 times. Okay. And that's indeed what happens. Okay. So again, this is the block of code that's repeated for each iteration. Okay. And the variable that you're iterating on is I, and this 1:10 is basically your list or your vector, right? So it's iterating upon this list, right? And this is really the variable this is the index variable that you can, you need to know. This is really a useful variable, right? Because you can then track this within your loop if you want to do anything more sophisticated. So this is a simple example of a for loop. Let's go back to slides. I'll provide a few more examples here. Okay. So there are many ways to write a for loop, or they're going to look very similar, but there are different ways. So here's, let's say I have this vector x. It's got 5 character values. The letter A, B, C, D, and E. So this is just a vector of characters. I can run this for loop where I is in 1:5 and print x, the element I. So this would just print A, B, C, D in order. Okay, that's one way of writing a for loop here. The second way to have the same output here is using this second for loop for letter in x, print letter. Okay, it looks different, but again, this will result in the same output. Okay, it's going to index through, it's going to iterate through this vector x, right? And the letter is going to think of, again, it's like the variable that I'm going to iterate on, right? So letter and I are basically analogous here, right? Okay, so letter's going to go through this index, or I'm sorry, go through this vector. Okay, so this will also run 5 times because there's 5 elements inside the vector x. Third way is this one right here. It utilizes the built-in base function sec underscore along, okay, x. So as exactly what it sounds like, you're going to sequence along. So you're going to go along, you're going to iterate through the index of this vector x. Okay, so for I in sec along x means I'm going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however long your vector is. It's going to go in sequence. Okay, and then so again print xi. So it's going to print each element in here. Okay, so that's the third way. And then lastly, for I in 1 through 1:5, print xi. Another simple way of writing it. You typically kind of write this when it's a very simple for loop, and it's kind of one-liner. But if you want to do something more sophisticated, you're probably going to end up using some of these other structures. But technically, all 4 of this will result in the same output. Okay, so let's go back to RStudio, and I'll demonstrate all 4 of these and show that indeed all have the same output. Okay, so let's start with first set up X here. Okay, so A, B, C, D, E. Okay, so X is a vector of strings or characters. Okay, so the first for loop I'm going to write is for I in 1:5. So this is the way you set up a for loop in R. Okay, for the keyword for, and then the parentheses, and then this is the variable I'm going to use as to represent my index, and this is what I'm iterating against, right? So this is typically a vector or a list. Okay, there's 5 elements in X, so that's why I'm going from 1 through 5, and then I'm going to create a curly bracket, and this is the code that's going to repeat for every iteration of that for loop. And all this is going to do is print X element I, right? So remember, I goes from 1 through 5, so it's going to output the first element, then the second element, the third, fourth, and fifth, right? So let's run that, and indeed, it says A, B, C, D, E. Okay. Let's do. Now let me show you something else. You can actually try to reverse this, right? I go from 5 to 1. Can you guess what would happen? Right? You guessed it, it's going to go backwards, right? It's going to go from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Let me revert back. Okay, so let me do the second way of writing this. Again, 4, but instead I'm going to use the word letter. Technically, I can use any word, any name here. I gotta be a little careful here because some of these names could be in front of a built-in function. So I can do this over here like this. Let's see what happens. Let's change this letter to, I don't know, let's call it letter, let's call it letter X or letter vect, okay? And then print letter vect, okay? Same result, right? Okay. Let's do the third one using the sequence along built-in base function. For I in sequence along my vector X, and I'm going to print X. Okay, so what you're telling R to do is look at the vector X. Okay, you're going to sequence along. So there's 5 elements. It's going to go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the value of I. I will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're printing then element of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of vector X. Okay, indeed, that's the result I get. And lastly, for I in 1:5, I'm just going to print xi, and this is simple enough. I have these 5 results. Okay, so as I indicated before, these 4 different ways of writing the for loop, they all result in the same thing. Okay. All right, let's go back to slides. I'm going to show you a nested for loop next. Okay, for loops can be nested. Okay, so let's say giving you, so what does a nested for loop mean? It just means there's 4 loops within a for loop. Okay, it just again comes in very handy. Let's say I have 2 variables, x and y, and both of these are vectors of numbers. X contains numbers 1, 2, and 3. Y contains numbers 11, 12, and 13. Both of them in the specific order that I just mentioned. I'm going to write a nested for loop. So for I in second long x, inside the first for loop, I have another inner for loop where the index now is j and not I. Okay, and then I'm going to finish it out with a statement there. So I'm going to print out the value from x. So xi, we just kind of this will just say element from x plus an element from y equals the 2 things combined. Okay, so I see a typo there. Let me just quickly. So this for loop will simply say, if this works as it's supposed to, it would simply say 1 plus 11 equals to 12, and then 2 plus 12 equals to 12, etc. Right? So let's kind of think about this. So how is this running? First set I equals to 1, right? Okay, and then j is the index for the inner loop, and that's iterating against y. So what we shall see is it's going to be 1 plus 11 equals to 12, then 1 plus 12 equals 13, 1 plus 13 equals 14. Then the index for the outer loop, it'll increment from I equals to 1 to 2. So now you're over here, it'll be, so you'll do 2 plus 11, because j now goes back to 1. Okay, then it'll rate this way, right? So again, there'll be 1, and then 1 plus 11, 1 plus 12, 1 plus 13. Then I will then go to 2. There'll be 2 plus 11, 2 plus 13, 12, 2 plus 13, and then 3 plus 11, 3 plus 12, 3 plus 13. Okay, let's give that a try and see if that's indeed what we get here. Okay, I'm gonna go back to RStudio. Okay, so let's write out that sequence here. Nested for loop. I'm going to set x as a vector of 1, 2, and 3, then y as a vector of 11, 12, 13. Let's check to make sure that's indeed true. Okay, so both of them are vectors or just numerics. Okay, so I'm going to write the outer loop here for I in sec along x. Okay, so I'm going to iterate through this first vector. Okay, we've got 3 elements. Okay, and inside my for loop, I'm going to put another for loop. So this is what makes it a nested for loop. Equal to y, and I'm going to print page 0 I, and then before I do that, let me just make it more simpler. Rather than put all that in, let me make it even simpler and just put x I plus y j. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the way what we should see happen is the outer loop fixes I at 1 first, so it'll be 1, and then it will iterate through the vector y, so 1 plus 11, which is 12, and then 1 plus 12, which is 13, and then 1 plus 13, which is equal to 14, and then it'll go to 2 plus 11, then 2 plus 12, and 2 plus 13. And we'll just see the result. We won't actually see the plus sign or anything. We'll actually see the sum, right? So let's run this and see what we get, okay? And it's expected we get, exactly what we expected, right? 12, 13, 14. So there should be 9 values total, right? Because for every one iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop runs 3 times, right? Okay, let me change this. Let me add a 14 here. Okay, then how many elements should we see when we run this? We should see 3 times 4, which is 12, right? Okay, so if I run this again, we see there's 12 lines now, 12 outputs. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 12 outputs. You can count them out. There's 12 outputs. Okay. So let me revert this back. Let me add in the other, because I actually want to write out x plus y equal, or 1 plus 11 equals 12. So I have to paste 0. Okay. I'm going to put the x value. Put a plus sign, then the y value, and then the equal sign. Okay, and the actual values, right? So I'm gonna delete that. Okay, so it looks correct. Let's try that again. Oops, there's a mistake somewhere here. Yeah, I'm missing a closing parentheses. Let's try that again. Right, so I have these 9. You know what? 9 values, right? I might actually have. Let's see. Let me double try it again. Yeah, okay, because I didn't reset the value of y, so it was running it. There were things that had 4 values inside of y. Okay, if I rerun, and now there's 9 outputs total, right? Okay, so you can put more for loops inside other for loops. Okay, so you can have a lot more. Just be careful; you can get very crowded and confusing very quickly. So typically, you don't want to add more than like 2 levels, or even maybe at most 3 levels. Right near nested for loop. It's probably not a good idea to add more than that, because it will get very confusing. Okay, so this video showed the general structure of a for loop in R. So hopefully, this will help you get started on whatever you're working on. Make sure you check out some of the other videos on how to write a while loop, and also some more advanced examples of using control structures like the for loop and the if statements and other structures that help you write more complex, sophisticated R programs. Okay. Thanks for watching. Take care.